this now. It's a weird one, but it's a lot less weird than the last two. Adam said review 1. Unfortunately, we are gonna have to do it without music this time because I've been the Gathering has asked me to record this. I mean, it's always on a VOD, but we're recording it specifically. Like, I'm gonna have an editor editing this down as real YouTube content. Kind of fun. I don't know. It's weird to me that anybody would want to make things. Here we go. Hey, haiku. No, haiku. It is in the set review already, and they're all 10. At least for the commons and uncommons. Some of the rares, very scary. Oh, why can't you hear? You hear me? Ah, my mic. Thanks for the heads up. My mic sensitivity was down way too low. All right, how's that? Tell me if there's any echo. All right, how's that? Okay, great. Now, why can't I resize this? Here we go. I don't remember how I usually do this, but I think this is how I usually do it. That looks right. Not having music is so weird to me. I usually have it pretty quiet, but still. So I generally wear this shirt for important stream. Usually, okay, so I got 4 shirts for streaming. The problem is I started using my real face when it got hot out. So all of the other shirts I have for streaming are too hot. It's too hot for them. But I did order actually another big pile. I ordered like 10 more of these shirts. Different Pokemon and this exact shirt. I just like this shirt. All right. Camera. I did find it. I didn't find a Gengar shirt. I found a Gengar family shirt though. I really like. Hey KP, good to see ya. Hey, have you been playing in the MH3 opens? All right, that looks right. That looks right. Quick check of all the slides, and then we'll get into it. Do side down a little bit here. I'll view a teensy bit. That looks right for everything else. All right, it's just these that have to shrink and slide a little bit. Not going to be perfect. That's oof. Unshape here. Just the can. I didn't paint my nails. I knew I was forgetting something. I feel you. I wasn't able to play. I did one run late last night, but like my heart wasn't in it. I don't know that I'll do the VOD this time. It might go just straight to YouTube edited. All these slides. Oh. Okay, I missed the 2 lands. Okay, good thing I checked. I didn't review these lands. The Haven. There's very limited fixing. Fixing's also a lot less important. We're gonna give it a 5. Sometimes you'll really need it. Sometimes you won't need it at all. When you need it, you'll know. Also, 1-drops matter enough that it's not free to run a tap land. I have in the past given this a very high rating. Uncharted Haven. Grotto, I think is probably better. Because Surveil, it's better than usual because Surveil is value. Surveil is worth the whole card in some decks, not in all the decks. And because you're leaning towards 2-color decks, it's going to be a lot more reasonable. All right, great. Let's get started. I loved MH3, but I think I'm the outlier. And that's okay. All right, here we go. I'm going to start the recording. Okay. I'm recording. I'm streaming. Tell me if I lag. I don't usually do both. Computer should be able to handle it, but it's been a while. Here we go. Wow. Sorry, it's going to take me a bit to get used to not having the music. Yeah, so sorry. I want to talk about this. Remind me to talk about MHC later. Here we go. So this is the full set review for Bloomburrow Part 1. So today we're going to be covering the overview, the multicolored cards, and all of the white cards that are common and uncommon. We'll cover the artifacts and the lands as well, although there are some color lands that I put with their respective colors. In general, I will be taking questions between slides, but do ask them. They're very valuable to me. Either you're wrong and I'll convince you, or I'm wrong and we'll learn something new. I don't mind revising my ratings on the fly. So, in my videos, we use the Scuffle review system. I grade on a scale from 1 to 10. A 1 is a card that you should never play, a 2 is a card you should try not to play, and a 3 is replaceable. Generally, you want to avoid things in the 1 to 3. A 4 is a solid card, a 5 is a strong card. You want 5s in your deck. A 6 is a card that you will always play in a given color or deck. If you are that archetype or are that color, you will play that card. A 7 is a reason to be that deck. If you see that card late, that's open, you should play it. An 8 is a card that you'll do work to play. You'll splash it, you'll change colors for it, you will make adjustments for that card. A 9 is a card that you just will play. If you get past a Gruff Triplets in pack 1, you're green now. If you get past a very strong card, if you get past a 9, it's worth changing things up for. And 10 is a card you will always play, no exceptions. They're very rare. I also give every card a floor value and a ceiling value, the worst and best a card will be, and then the amount of effort that it takes to bridge that gap. So that includes diminishing returns, sideboard cards, situational cards, cards you build around, cards that only work in certain decks. And the thing about my system is your goal isn't necessarily to take a card based on that average value, that first number. Your goal is to get all of your cards to that ceiling. And that's not going to be easy. Sometimes you'll find a card early and you'll be like, I need 8 other cards to make this work, but it's going to be worth it to get it up to that 9 or 10, something that wins the game. This is for Bloomburrow. The It's a cute set. Haiku has requested a cuteness scale, but too many of them are 10s, so we're just going to assume that if I don't specifically talk about how cute a card is, it's going to be a 9, and then if I do, it's going to be a 10, and some cards are scary. And don't worry about that, too. This is going to look a little different from other set reviews in the order that we talk about the mechanics and the cards, because so much more of it makes sense to talk about with the card in front of us in relation to the next cards. So, there are 10 creature types that matter in this set. There's a lot more than 10 types total, but they are mostly things that you don't have to care about. What you care about are these 10 types, and each of these 10 types has a color pair that is associated with. So they are lizard, mouse, otter, raccoon, bird, frog, rat, bat, squirrel, and rabbit. And each of those has 2 colors that it's attached to. So for the rock face village, it says it's a weird assortment. It's red, tap, target lizard, mouse, otter, or raccoon you control gets +1/+0 and gains haste until end of turn. These are the 4 red creature types. So it says lizard, mouse, otter, and raccoon because lizards are red-black, mice are red-white, otters are red-blue, and raccoons are red-green. So this is a cycle of 5 lands, but if a card has a weird assortment attached to it, like lizard, mouse, otter, or raccoon, it's usually going to be the monocolor. These are the 4 red creature types. So creature types are mechanically important and attached to colors in this format. There aren't going to be bats outside of rares. I haven't looked at all the rares yet. There aren't any bats outside of rares that are black-white cards, or black cards, or white cards. That aren't black cards and white cards. Hey, Bearded, good to see ya. Thanks for the sub. I appreciate it, buddy. All right, we're not going to talk about all the mechanics in this set. We're just going to talk about a couple, and everything else is going to be case by case. So the first mechanic is gift. Gift is you give your opponent a thing and you get something extra. There are 23 total cards with gift. There's only one payoff that I saw at Uncommon. There might be some rare ones. There's only one payoff that says when you give a gift, do a thing. And mostly we're going to have to evaluate gift cards case by case. But I like the mechanic. I think it's very interesting. What that usually does is create modes on cards. So like, I love this card, Parting Gust. Exile a non-token creature. If the gift wasn't promised, return to the battlefield under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter on it at the beginning of the next end step. Or you can give them a fish, which is a 1/1 tapped token. So either this is exile target creature and return it to play a little bit bigger, an otherworldly journey, or bovine intervention. You exile a creature and they get a fish. And the options are very nice. Gift is a really cool mechanic in Commander and a really cool mechanic with cards like Narset, yes. But they did a good job of designing it into limited for this set. A lot of stuff is very situational and you don't mind giving them the gift. You do have to be a little bit careful because there's a lot of cards that care about specific, like if there's a card that says if you have a token in play, do a thing, then gifting your opponent a food might be a little bit dangerous. My dog needs some pets. All right. It's not a mechanic, but tokens are an important part of the set. So one of the other mechanics is Offspring. These are the 2 mechanics that appear across all the colors. Offspring is you may pay an additional cost, and you get a 1/1 copy of the creature. So this Splash Slasher, when it enters, enters the battlefield with just enters. It's a little more elegant. It works as much as I miss the keyword ETB. But when this creature enters, tap up to 1 target creature and put a stun counter on it. So this is a 4-mana 3/3 with that stuns a creature when it comes into play. With Kicker 2, make a 1/1 that does the same thing. So Offspring tends to be on these ability creatures. It should play pretty well online. It should play pretty terribly in real life. And is a really cool mechanic online, though. Tokens matter, and there's a few ways to use it. So Offspring makes additional creatures. There's a lot of ways to just abuse. Like, this is a great card, 3 mana, make 3 rabbits. That's really good in this set. There's a lot of ways to go wide. And there's also a certain number of cards, specifically rabbits, that say that have bonus effects while you control a token. And this includes creature tokens, Offspring tokens, which are copies, and food tokens. So some strategies value tokens, and some just want a bunch of creatures in play. All right. Usually this is where I talk about the rest of the mechanics, but instead we're going to jump straight into the stats, and then we will be talking about each of the mechanics after the first of its multicolored signpost cards. It's just going to be easier that way. Because the rest of the mechanics in this set are attached to specific color combinations and therefore specific creature types. Stats. There's 115 creatures in this set, including equivalent creatures, cards like Hop to It that just make tokens, cards that are vehicles or are creatures some of the time. But it's there's 115 creatures in the set. There's 3 disenchants, destroy target artifact and enchantment. There's 1 shatter, destroy target artifact. There's 18 creatures with flying. That's a little bit higher than usual. There's 8 creatures with reach, and then another 2 cards that grant reach or flying. There are 14 combat tricks. That is abnormally high compared to other sets. There's a lot of combat tricks in this set. A lot of them are good. I always make sure to count the combat tricks because the more combat tricks there are in the set, the worse each combat trick is, just by a little bit. That doesn't mean it's bad, it just means that you will have more options to replace them. There are 8 pieces of recursion. There are 8 ways to return a creature or permanent card from your graveyard to play. That's also really high. There are 5 sources of colorless fixing. That's pretty normal. And then there are 10 cards that surveil, plus another 4 that mill. We'll talk more about that when we get to blue-black. But there are 19 creatures with 1 toughness, 33 with 2 toughness, 26 with 3 toughness, 16 with 4 toughness, 6 with 5 toughness, 3 with 6 toughness, and 0 with more than that. I think that's the first. There's a hard cap at 6 toughness. Oh, this is just a common and uncommon, I should have said at the beginning. But that's most of what we play with in Limited anyway. For removal, there are 2 spells that deal 1 damage. We didn't have any in the last set. That kills 18% of creatures. There are 3 spells that deal 2 damage or give -2/-2. That kills half of all common and uncommon creatures in the set. There's 1 card that deals 3 damage, kills 75% of the creatures, 3/4 of the creatures in the set. There are 2 spells that deal 4 damage that kills 91% of the creatures in the set. It's almost as good as destroy target creature. But remember, there's combat tricks. There are 0 cards that deal 5 damage, but there is a 1 card. There's 1 spell that deals 6 damage to a creature that kills every creature in the set. So it is destroy target creature. Other than that, we have 7 unconditional removal spells, 4 conditional removal spells, 2 auras, none of which are white, they're both blue this time, 3 counter spells, all pretty solid. There's 1 card that taps creatures consistently. There's a few ways that do it one time. There's 4 bounce spells, there's 1 card that tucks a creature down, there's 2 fight spells, 3 bite spells, and 5 rares. What you might notice from this list of removal is that there are more blue removal spells than usual. Blue doesn't usually get any. This time, blue has a ton of ways to interact with creatures. Shape of the format. So, you're right, Theo. This is not a Sir Mix-a-Lot set. This is more complex than a core set in a lot of really interesting ways. But it's not that much more difficult than a core set. And that's going to feel very refreshing after the past few sets we've had. Like MKM, OTJ, MH3. 2 out of 3 of those were fantastic draft sets. 1 of them was an okay draft set. But they're all complex. This one is going to be a lot less complex than the other set. I don't know that red-white aggro gets there. I mean, red-white aggro is really good. We'll talk about it. The complexity of this set is going to be in the gameplay. You're going to find your deck very easy to draft, your sealed deck very easy to assemble. Not really, but compared to like MH3, it's going to be much easier to get your deck together and much harder to play. There's a lot of gameplay decisions in the moment, which is going to be really fun. I think it's going to feel refreshingly different. Some of you might find it a little easier than usual. Some of you might find it a little harder than usual, but it's going to be fun. In terms of value you generate, there's a lot of incremental value. There's not really engines in the way that we've been seeing recently, but there's a lot of cards with a short decision that you have to make on how to pull value out of it. And that's very cool. The cards are generally easier to work with until you're playing with them. Like, it's easier to assemble your deck. I consider this a puzzle set. You assemble your deck in pieces and little packages until it's done. You have to get it together. Cards will slot into specific packages, colors, and archetypes. There are a lot of cards that this only works in this deck. This only works with these cards. That's not a bad thing. It means that you can get the cards you need later. You do have to watch the synergy versus discord because there are there are synergy things in this set, but that's why it's a puzzle set and not a synergy set. There are specific things that you need to avoid. So like here, I've got a few cards. Treetop Sentries, Forage is one of the mechanics for green and black. The Forage, you either exile 3 cards from your graveyard or sacrifice a food. That is at odds with Threshold, where you have to have 7 cards in your graveyard. You can't play you can't play Forage cards in the same deck as your Threshold cards. You can't play a ton of Recursion with your Threshold or with your Forage cards. Those are discordant. You can't put them together. Cards like this Kindle Spark Duo deal 1 damage to target opponent. You tap to ping them for 1. That's not worth a card most of the time, but if you care about your opponent losing life for something like Flame Cash Gecko, then suddenly it's worth a card. So yeah, you got to assemble your set in puzzles. Oh, all right. Because I was asked this before, and I promised I'd answer on the next set. What are the types of sets? So there's no specific number, but these are the 5 types of sets I've talked about in these set reviews. Synergy is probably the most common under Modern Magic. That just means your cards should work with your other cards, make them happen. Usually it means that's the line you're going for. A puzzle set is if you're missing pieces of the puzzle, your deck won't work. That's important. Like, you can't have a threshold deck without enough surveil. You can't have a forge deck without enough food. This is a puzzle set. A power set is where you want the best cards. Generally, that's simpler sets. It's been a while. That's something like mystery boosters. Your good cards are the good cards. Doesn't matter what you have around it. Like Streets of New Capenna, that was a power set. If you saw Inspiring Overseer, you took Inspiring Overseer. It didn't matter what you put around it. A Prince power set is not power cards are not necessarily rares. A Prince set means that they are necessarily rares. If you don't open right, you're fucked. I mean, if you don't open right, you're in trouble. MKM was a Prince set. I thought MKM was a puzzle set, and I'm really annoyed that it wasn't. And then a core set is simplicity. It's bread. You need bombs, removal, evasion. It's yeah, but I'm trying to say it a little bit differently, Haiku. So outlaws, you could. So I put outlaws as a synergy set. I think you're right, Haiku. When I did my shape, I put outlaws of Thunder Junction as a synergy set. I think it was a power set, but it was a weird power set because interaction was what was important more than power. All right, on to our first card. So up first we have blue-white. I'm going to be talking about each color pair before each of these first 20 cards, because it's easier to do it with a card in front of me. Blue-white is flyers aiding non-flyers. So if it were just blue-white flyers like we've seen it in the past, then every creature with flying would be good regardless of what was around it. I love, excuse me. I love blue-white in this set because you can't just take flyers. This is a puzzle set. This card is very good. It's not, but you want a 2-mana creature that doesn't have flying, and then you want Plume Creed Mentor. Like, if this is a 3-mana 2/3 flyer, that's fine. If this is a 3-mana 2/3 flyer that puts a counter on your 2-drop to enable an attack that you wouldn't have had otherwise, this card is fantastic. So it's the birds providing support to all the things that aren't birds. It's flyers giving information and rides and helping out all of the creatures without flying. So Plume Creed Mentor as a 3-mana 2/3 flyer is fine. If it's a 3-mana 3/4 flyer, meaning that it's a 2/3 that put a counter down, that is really good. If it's a 3-mana 3/4 that puts 5 counters down because you have 5 flyers, you're gonna win the game. Card's really good. You want to have a deck built with like a ton of creatures that are 1 or 2 mana that don't have flying, and then everything else that has flying above it. You want more flyers than non-flyers, but you do want both, because if you have 1 flyer and 4 flyers, you can put all 4 counters on the 1 creature. The 2-drops are very good in this set. So I gave it a 7 with a ceiling of a 7 and low effort. It's usually going to play near that ceiling of a 7 if you drafted your deck right. You can first pick a Plume Creed Mentor, pick a ton of flyers, and then start grabbing your 2-drops as they come back around, because it's much easier to find a 2-mana creature without flyer than a 3-mana creature with flying. There are a lot of good 3-mana flyers. It's very good. So Theo, this is a really good card for a bunch of reasons. We'll talk about them more soon. But if this were just stats, this is the 3-mana 3/4 flyer. That's great. But the red-white mechanic is Valiant. That's a mechanic that cares about targeting your other creatures with abilities. That means there's a ton of white cards that get extra effects when you put the +1/+1 counters on it. The one of the overarching mechanics is offspring, which means that there are multiple flyers that come in with extra flyers. So I gave it a seal. It's using a play that ceiling of a 7. You do have to put the work in, but you can do it. You can get so much more than one card out of value out of just targeting a +1/+1 counter. And give it time, Bearded. There's some horsemanship. I feel like I just saw some horsemanship. Not in this set, though. All right, up next, Seed Pod Squire. Still solid, not as good as the last one. Same as the last one in that it's pretty easy to get working. It's a 4-mana 3/3 flyer. Every color pair has both a multicolored card and a guild card. The guild cards aren't multicolored in the set that they go into a blue-white deck. This goes well in a white deck or a blue deck, because in a white deck, in a red-white deck, you want this card because it triggers your Valiant attacks. And in a blue-red deck, you want this card because it enables attacks on your first striking deck. These multicolored hybrid cards, generally, you'll find that there's a huge difference between the ones that are single pip and double pip, and they're designed really well. Like, this would be an okay card in a lot of sets. It's a 4-mana 3/3 that attacks as a 4/4 as long as it's not attacking alone. But there are enough cards that care about being targeted by this ability that you're pretty happy to run it. So yeah, I gave it a 5 with a ceiling of 5 and a floor of a 3. That floor of a 3 is if you don't have good things to grow with it. You need to make sure that it's enabling attacks that you wouldn't have had otherwise, or else it's a 4-mana 3/3. That's bad. 4-mana 4/4 flyer, that's great. If you want to take notes, Haiku, I do try. I always tell people if this doesn't make you better at drafting, then something back. All right. Tidecaller Mentor. So this is the blue-black mechanic is Threshold. Threshold is an old mechanic from Odyssey that says if you have 7 or more cards in the graveyard, do a thing. When the mechanic was first invented, Surveil didn't exist. Self-mill, like the keyword mill, was not a thing. It was just meant to be, this is something that happens in the late game. In this set, you have options to hasten your threshold. You can get to threshold faster. So this is a good card, not because it's got a great effect. It's 7 more cards in your graveyard, return up to 1 target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. But because it's a 3-mana 3/3 with Menace. Like, you don't have to feel bad playing this card early, because a 3-mana 3/3 with Menace is often fine in a blue-black deck. This has a little extra value in this set because there are very powerful creatures that you want to bounce. You often want to bounce your own creatures, and there are really good ways to blink this card. Mentor has a lot of great ways to blink it. You can play it on turn 3, trade it off, let it die, and then return it from your graveyard to your hand or to play. And there's a 1 blue mana blink target creature spell. Being able to bounce a creature is very strong. Yep, it is a waterbender. There are 10 cards in this set with Surveil at common and uncommon, and 3 sources of self-mill. Don't be afraid to play out the Tidecaller Mentor early, and then plan to blink it or return it to play after it dies a little later. So I gave it a 6. It's tough to get it to the ceiling of a 7. The ceiling of a 7, that's if you're playing it turn 3, 4, or 5 with Threshold. That's really difficult. But that floor of a 5 is not bad. It's usually going to play closer to that. Don't stress about having thresholds when you cast a spell. And Menace is kind of weak in this set. It's really easy to just pile a few extra creatures in play in front of it. Thanks for the follow, Pool. I'm only doing... Sorry, you don't get all of the notifications because this is a... we are recording this to go online, but I still appreciate you. Hey, Firebenders can be born in the Water Nation. Waterbenders can be born in the Fire Nation. It happens. Yeah, but this Threshold ability is really good in the right deck. All right, Mind Drill Assailant. This, unlike a lot of the other ones, this is only good in blue-black. This is a great card when it's a 4-mana 2/5 blocker that eventually becomes a 5/5 that attacks and has that little bonus Surveil. It's a weak card for a splash, and it has low synergy with the other archetypes. And you'll find that a lot of the cards in this set are rated on flexibility. So this is a great card in blue-black, but it's got very low flexibility in other colors. So I gave it a 4. It's a 6 in blue-black. If you are specifically the blue-black threshold deck, this card is really good. But in all the other decks, it's pretty average. So floor of 3, ceiling of 6, average of 4. It's okay in the black decks. It's okay in the blue decks. It's great in the blue-black decks. It's weak everywhere else. Fireglass Mentor. So this is a very cool card. It's a 2-mana 2/1. 1 toughness is not free in this set like it is in other set, like it was in MH3. There's a lot of 1/1 tokens. There's good ways to ping it. You want to try and find a way to grow this card. But this is a reasonable attacker that allows for a lot of card flow for the red-black deck in the late game. I'm not going to be splashing this, and I will probably take a removal spell over it. But if you are, the way this will tend to play is turn 2 you cast it, turn 3 your opponent is looking to block, so you can kill a creature or burn them and draw a card, and you'll probably get 2 to 3 cards out of this over the course of the game. Not always the cards you want, and you will often, what this card does is make spending a whole spell to deal damage worth it, and that's what the red-black deck wants to be doing. But it's a lot tougher to build around than some of these other uncommons and build arounds. So I gave it a 5 with a floor of a 4 and a ceiling of a 7. You can get it to that ceiling. It's not impossible, but you want to be an aggressive, low curve deck that can spend a spell to deal damage to your opponent and then still play the land off. Attackers. Haiku. So it's in bread, it's bombs, removal, evasion, attackers. So it just means creatures, like general things. General creatures that do the job. And then D is some people call it dudes, which are worse creatures. I call it duds because bread hasn't been relevant for 10 years. All right, so our red-black hybrid card, it's solid. It's always going to feel fine. Menace is kind of just average in this set because, like, if this didn't have Menace, if this last ability weren't here, and you didn't have Bloodthirst, then it would usually be blocked by 2 Squirrels or 2 Rapids or 2 Otters. Because it does have both of these lines of text, it's actually solid if you can make use of both. If you have pump spells to take advantage of the Menace, if you have 2 drops to make sure that your opponent lost life, we're going to talk about this a lot when we get to red and black. There are ways to deal direct damage. Then it's at that ceiling of a 5. But I don't want to pick this card until I have those cards. I want this to be a 3-mana 4/3 that gains Menace, and that's not a good enough spell for me to have to do so much work for. But it's still fine. It's a nice filler 3-drop that it's filler. But don't be upset if you have to play some filler. You can't hide pauses with... Why can't you hide pauses with this mechanic? We'll talk more about that later. Up next, Wandertail Mentor. So the red-green mechanic is pretty cool. It's expend. It's almost always... Actually, we're going to check this really quick because I want to check against the rares. I'm making sure that every card with expend says expend 4. Expend 8. Okay, so there's a rare. Oh, there's a commander rare. That doesn't count. All right, so every draftable card has expend 4. Expend 4 means that you spend 4 mana playing spells. This card is really good for a few reasons. If this had no text other than 2 mana, 2/2, tap for mana, this would be a good card. Oh, it does? Did I miss it? Oh, you're right. There's a rare with expend 8. It doesn't matter because you're expending in increments of 4. So, what an expend deck wants is to play 2 mana spells and 4 mana spells. 4 mana spells. 2 mana, 4 mana. Nothing else. You want 2 mana and 4 mana spells. Your 3 mana spells become a liability in the expend deck because casting a 3 mana and a 2 mana spell, it's fine, but you'd rather play a 5-drop at that point. And this card lets you do that. If you have 3 Wandertail Mentors, you don't have to run a single 3-drop in your deck, because you play Wandertail Mentor on turn 2, and then your 4-drop on turn 3. This becomes a 3/3 right the turn after you play it. Or if you do just play 2 2-drops on turn 3, it's a 3/3 right away. The floor of a 6 is what it's usually going to play at. That's a 2-mana 2/2 that grows over time. It's a dork that draws removal. It's just very good. But when you're playing the expend deck, you want 2-drops and 4-drops. And this means that you don't have to run the 3s. It's great. You can spend 3 and 1, but 1 is really tough, Theo. There are very few. There's a lot of great 1-drops in white and black. There's very few good 1-drops in red and green. If you have those 1-drops, there's some great ones at rare. If you have those 1-drops, then you can do a 3-drop and a 1-drop. But otherwise, you want 2s and 4s because that's what's most accessible. Hey, Foxy, how's it going? We're doing the set review tonight. All right, up next is the hybrid card. Again, this is pretty much a red-green card, although I'm not upset if I play this in a green deck or a red deck. Red's a little tough because red's a lot faster. But this is a great card in a green deck. When you expend 4, it's a 6/6 with trample. Otherwise, it's a 4/5 with trample. A 4/5 with trample is fine. A 6/6 with trample is good. If you can expend 4 regularly, then this is a good card. If you can't, it's fine. It's average. So floor of 3, ceiling of 5. In between that is a 4 with medium effort. All right, up next is Burrowguard Mentor. So the green-white mechanic in the set, the rabbits mechanic, is I need to raise the ceiling of this, but I'm happy with his score otherwise. This is a cool card with a lot of excellent follow-ups on turn 3. Whether that is the offspring mechanic or the 3-mana spell that makes 3 rabbits. This can attack as a 4/4 on turn 3, or more. But it's kind of secondary in pick order. Like, you do want these cards pretty early, but you're going to have to go back and forth a lot in green-white. Like, I'll pick this pack 1, pick 1, and then build the tokens deck. But otherwise, there are better. The green-white deck has a lot of tokens, and you have to decide whether you're going wide or going big, and you're not guaranteed to need this if you're not going big. But I do love the first copy, and if you build around it, it gets very good. So that's the ceiling of a 7. A 5, the floor of a 5 is pretty good. Like, we're assuming that if this is the only creature you have in play and it's after turn 1 or after turn 3, you're losing that game anyway. So usually this is going to be a 2-mana 2/2 or larger that grows, but your opponent does get to control the size of your creature a lot more than I like. And there's a few sweepers that are uncommon. Otherwise, this would be slightly higher. But I like this card. I'll be playing. The green-white mechanics are going to be really fun. Rabbits are going to be really fun. Yes, but the bunny corn also could be chump blocked. So the bunny corn was a rare. Counted all non-land permanents, including stuff like food, but it could be chump blocked. This one cannot. And that's a big deal in a set with so many 1/1s, like this Head of the Homestead. This card is really powerful in this set. It's a 5-mana 3/2 that makes 2 rabbits. The blue-green mechanic is blink. So green-white wants this, and blue-green wants this. But yeah, it's a 5-mana for 5/4 worth of power on a creature that can be blinked. It is 3 permanents, and it's very good in this set. The green-white deck wants to go wide. 5 is kind of a contested slot. The 5-drops are very good in this set. But yeah, Cloud Goat at home. This is a Cloud Goat at home, Theo, except for there are cards that say whenever a rabbit comes into play, and there are 6 ways to blink a creature at common and uncommon. Can you imagine if Lorwyn had 6 ways to blink Cloud Goat Ranger? Yeah. Hey, I played in Lorwyn too, Haiku. Alright, so the black-white mechanic is your life total changing on your turn. It's actually awesome. I love black-white in this set. It's also one of the reasons that I think, so at a glance, the red-white decks look best. But there are a lot of very good ways to combat them. So this is a 5-mana 3/5 Flying Vigilance. That's a fine body on its own. We've seen that do really good work, and it just kind of grinds them out. That floor of a 5 is if you don't have a lot of good ways to activate this. That ceiling of a 6 is if you can activate this every turn. There are a lot of cards that say whenever this attacks, gain a life, or whenever a creature comes into play, gain a life, or pay 2 life, draw 2 cards. All of those effects trigger the Starseer Mentor. And this is a great top end for the black-white life change deck, is what I'm calling it. But cool card in general, happy to play it. And I love this grindy mechanic. The thing is, in this set, like, your opponent can make a food every... This is ultimately your opponent sacrifices a food. But your opponent can make a 1/1 every turn. They can't do it forever. And you're still attacking them in the air as a 3/5. For the black-white deck, incidentally, lifelink is really good. Like, a 1/1 lifelink would be fantastic in the black-white deck. It's not a thing, but it would be. Moonrise Cleric, this is not correct. Oh, this is right. Yeah. So I gave it a 5. I'm giving it a revisit because this is really good in the black-white deck. This is really good in the Flyers deck, in blue-white Flyers. It's good in... It's weak in red-white, and it's weak in green-white. That's enough for me to drop it. We're going to go ahead and lower it to a 4. But yeah, this is one of the few ways to easily trigger this every turn. And with these two cards together, you're attacking for 5 in the air every turn. You really want this in the black-white deck. Everywhere else is going to be fine. It's a fine body. That's all right. This is a really good point, Ranger. So if you can't see it, what Ranger said is the first few times this ability triggers is fine. The 6th time is an issue. Exactly. That's why this is a cool card, and that's how black-white plays in this set. It's grindy. You gain life, you spend that life for cards, and then you gain effects when those things happen. Stormcatch Mentor. Okay, so this one requires more specific cards to work with than the other things we do. Oh, blue-red is prowess. It's non-creature spells. It's otters. Otters care about non-creature spells I can't remember the name of the set anymore. This is going to bother the heck out of me. Don't tell me the name of this set. I spent so long looking at the cards from this set that now I can't remember what it's called. Bloomhaven. Bloomburrow. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm tired. All right. This card is bad by itself. Okay? Like, it's not like a 3/5 body. You need to build around it, and then it's great. There is a I was looking at BLB thing, and I'm like, which one is it? Okay. There's a card that says 3 mana, draw 2 cards that costs 1 less mana if you control an otter. If you have Stormcatch Mentor in play, that's 1 mana, draw 2 cards. That is really good. Haiku, they did a good job on the prowess mechanic this time. But like, you can't splash this card. It's not free, but you can grab it and you can force otters, and it's gonna work. Yeah, compared to the other ones, this one is a lot more work, but this instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, stacks, and is very relevant for otters specifically. Like, it's only otters that wants this card, but they want this card bad. Hey, Bulldozer, good to see ya. All right, Tempest Angler. We have seen this card before in Quandrix Pledge Mage. That one cared about copying, this one doesn't, but this one lets you do non-creature spells. If you can get 1 trigger off on this and make this a 3/3, you're happy. Like, 3/3, 3/3 with the threat of growth is valuable, but like, you can attack this 2/2 into your opponent's 2/2, and they can't block it. It'll grow. It's not hard to make this card big. It's not hard to make this card huge. I gave it a 6 with a floor of 5 and a ceiling of 7. That floor of 5 is if you have a few instants and sorceries, which you cannot avoid having a few instants and sorceries. If you have a lot and you can make that happen, then this is premier in the Otter deck. This is a very good Otters card. You will have to fight for this. So I gave it a high rating because you're going to have to pick it pretty high. Your opponent's blue-black control deck wants this card. Your opponent's red-white Valiant deck that didn't get enough abilities but has instances of sorceries to target things wants this card. So you'll have to fight for it. If you're going to be blue-red, then you want to take this pretty high. There's a lot of great cantrips in blue-red, and these 2 cards plus the cantrips are how this deck wins the game. It's a good card. Take it high. I think this is the best multicolored common. I'm just checking my other ratings. Yeah, so it's pretty close between Head of Homestead and Tempest Angler. I gave it to Tempest Angler, but that's because like you can make this card better than the Angler with enough blink. I should probably lower the ceiling, but I'm not going to do that right now. All right, up next is Green Black Forage. All right, Green Black Forage is squirrel warlocks, just squirrels. To forage, you can either sacrifice a food or exile 3 cards from your graveyard. That is counter to Threshold. That is counter to gaining life. The forage deck doesn't play well with other decks. If you have a green-white deck where you're making a bunch of food, you can forage a bit, but it's a real cost. However, it's usually worth paying. Like a 3-mana 2/3 is okay. A 3-mana 3/4, it's pretty good. If you have cards in your graveyard, if you're good at making it work. This card is some work. There's not a lot of cards. This is the only card that says, when you forage, do a thing. I gave it a 4 with a floor of 3 and a ceiling of 5. You have to be able to forage. That means that if you're a black deck with a lot of recursion, you might not be able to forage. If you are a blue-black deck that you care about Threshold, you're not going to be able to forage. But this is a solid card in general, and I'm usually pretty happy to play it. And up next is the Green-Black Signpost Uncommon. This card is nuts. It is a 2-mana 3/2. When it enters or dies, create a food token. There are good ways to blink creatures. There are good ways to recur creatures. There are good ways to use the food. And this is a 2-mana 3/2 body. Like a 2-mana 3/2 body that leaves 2 food behind. If you couldn't use the food for anything else, would be great. So I gave it a floor of 6. Usually going to play near that floor of 6. That ceiling of 7 is in the dedicated forage deck. If you can forage both of these, you're going to win the game. It's a really cool card. You didn't miss much, Haiku. I've just done the green-black cards, and that if I lose power, I'm coming back right away, so don't stress. All right, finally, nope, 2 left. All right, so next we have the red-white mechanic. The red-white mechanic is Valiant. So Valiant is like Heroic. Whenever this creature becomes the target of a spell or ability, it does a thing. So that ability is really important. In Theros, which was Heroic, you could do it as many times as you wanted, but it was only spells. You want to be triggering your Valiants every turn when you are a Valiant deck. This card is silly. This is a 3-mana 3/2 Vigilance Haste. That's something we'd play on its own, but if you target it with anything, you put a ++1 counter on it. So the existence of Valiant means that we're going to be evaluating every red and white ability with that in mind. So the red and white abilities, there's creatures that are like tap, put a target creature gets ++1 until end of turn. That triggers Valiant. The blue-white bird, this creature, Plume Creed Mentor, put a ++1 counter on target creature you control without flying. That triggers Valiant. Valiant is a very powerful mechanic. There are excellent combat tricks. There are excellent abilities for triggering it. A lot of people think Boros is going to be the big deck. Boros is incredibly powerful and aggressive, but there's also a lot of great blockers and good ways to gain life in this set. So you want these growth creatures. That's why the Seedglade Mentor is so important to Boros. Because, yeah, your opponent can stabilize against all of your 2/2s and 3/3s and Anthems, but if this is a 6/5 Vigilance, life's going to be difficult for them. You want to be growing this every turn, but it's not terribly hard to make it grow every turn. Yes, you can only trigger Valiant once a turn, but you can also trigger Valiant on your opponent's turn. Yeah, Vigilance is so powerful on this card. It doesn't need it. It doesn't even need haste. I'd just play this card as a 3-mana 3/2 Valiant Grow. Card is really good. All right, here's a slightly weaker Valiant card. You have to be triggering this every turn. A 4-mana 4/4 with First Strike that scries 1 is great. A 4-mana 3/4 is a lot weaker, whereas a 3-mana 3/2 with Vigilance and Haste is still fine. So the Valiant creatures tend to fall into the what if I'm triggering this every turn and what if I'm not triggering this at all camps. This one you have to be triggering every turn. If you're triggering it every turn, it's quite good at that ceiling of 5. If you're not triggering it every turn, it's going to be closer to that 3 as a 4-mana 3/4. The threat of activation is real. Giving this creature +2/+0 and First Strike with it makes all your combat tricks a little bit better. I'm going to go ahead and raise the ceiling to a 6. Because if you're a combat trick deck, this card does a lot with combat trick. Solid card, nothing crazy. Cool Showcase of Valiant. All right, finally we have blue-green. Really excited for blue-green frog. So blue-green frogs in the set. care about entering the battlefield. So sometimes that means exiling a creature you control and returning to the battlefield under its owner's control. Sometimes it means bouncing a creature. There are lots of ways to develop value from your frogs by blinking them or returning them to your hand or returning them to play if you have some black. There's some good green ways to recur creatures from the graveyard. There's a lot you can do with frogs. This card's very strong. It's a 4-mana 4/4 with reach. That would almost be good enough. But this blink ability lets you generate a lot of value. Even if the creature doesn't have an enter the battlefield effect, putting a +1/+1 counter on it is really strong. And there's a lot of good enter the battlefield effects. There's also a lot of stuns and bounces. They do bounce. Some cards care about leaving. Some cards care about coming into play. 2-mana 1/1 ETB, draw a card. I'm sorry, enters. 2-mana 1/1 enters, draw a card. So this one is 2 pips, so it's best in the green-blue deck or in a green deck or in a blue deck. But there's so many ways to blink this card. There's so many ways to use the body. This is very powerful. There are a lot of ways to pull value out of the Pond Prophet, and we would already be playing a 2-mana 1/1 that draws a card. It's better in this set than Spirited Companion was in Neon Dynasty, and that is a really high bar. It's true, Theo. Hey, Dip. That's awesome, Dip. We are doing the set review today, which is content to be recorded. So I'll be addressing people between cards. All right. Up next, Barkform Harvester. So this is a card with changeling. That means it has every creature type. There frankly are not like this. The way creature types work in this set, it's not your frog deck has 100 frogs. It's your frog deck needs to have a frog in play, which makes this the worst version of a frog for your frog deck. This is the worst version of a rabbit for your rabbit deck. This is the worst version of a bird for your bird deck. But it's fine. It fills in that slot. If you aren't sure what to take, you can take an artifact changeling, use it later. This effect is useful if you're going to be milling yourself a lot. It's hard to mill yourself enough for this effect to be useful. 3-mana 2/3 reach isn't quite good enough. This card is going to be fine in any deck. It's never going to be great. So I gave it a 3, 4 of a 3. That ceiling of a 4, there are a few rares that care deeply about specific card types, creature types. Then this card gets a little better. But you want to have those rares first anyway. I added a slide. All right, I'm next. This is a cool card. So the Bumblefly with Share Pot, it's a 2 card. Like, it's 2 rectangles. It's a 2-mana artifact that makes a food. There are enough cards that want to have a food or a token or a way to gain life in play on turn 2. That makes this not a bad trade. It's not a terrible thing. And then destroying a non-land permanent, that's a good top end. So we've seen this kind of effect a lot to fill in with people who don't have enough removal. But 5 mana to deal with any permanent, it's not the worst. And the fact that it made you a food makes it a little more reasonable on the way in. Yes, it is okay. This is an okay piece of removal. Pick it up when you don't have enough. Don't take it too early, but don't be upset when you have to play it. That's a really good point, Beard, and I'm going to be talking about that. So Beard, I'm sorry, we can't see the chat anymore. So Beard said that there's some neat applications to sometimes getting value out of tribal benefits outside of your colors. We'll talk about those when we get there, and I'm excited to do that. That's ceiling of a 4, though. It's still not better than having the right card. Karen Square, thanks so much for the follow. All right, up next we have Fountainport Bell. So it's 1 mana to put a land on top, 1 mana to draw a card. So that means that you have options. It's a bad Abundant Harvest. So it's 2 mana, search up a basic land card, put it in your hand. That's bad. 2 mana, draw a card. That's cycling. That's bad. This card is only good in the Prowess deck. It is bad fixing when you really need fixing, but you gotta really need fixing. No, okay, we're gonna talk about that. So Mac Attack said, yeah. So like this is a great card in the Prowess deck and in the decks that can blink an artifact, but like even then it's fine. There are enough cards that there are enough niche cards that care about having a cheap cantrip or a spell that you can return. That like there are threshold decks. There are cards that want cards in the graveyard. It's going to be the worst version of a lot of those things, but it fills in those roles well enough that it's okay. So Max says that the Bumbleflower's Share Pot is a good card if your name is Sam Black. The way Sam Black tends to draft is he figured Sam Black's a very good player if you don't know who Sam Black is. Arguably the best player. Arguably the best player. He's up there for sure. The way Sam Black drafts is he figures out what isn't needed, like what you can pick up late, early in the format, and oftentimes that's this destroy target non-land permanent. So he just fills in, like he'll play worse removal if he decides that he doesn't need that much. And so he ends up with cards like Bumbleflower's Share Pot. Rather than let this card do what it's supposed to do, which is make sure you have enough removal so that newer players don't get, well, in trouble in their sealed deck. He uses it to wheel removal spells. It's a good system. All right, Heirloom Epic. This is a really cool card. So it's basically a 1-mana artifact with 4 mana, draw a card, convoke. It is sorcery speed only, but like tapping 4 creatures to draw a card is bad. Tapping 4 lands to draw a card is bad. If you can build a deck that does some combination of tapping 4 lands and 4 creatures, then this card's solid. There are creatures with vigilance. There are creatures that make a lot of creatures. There are creatures with defender. You will have time to use this card. Every given color has access to good card advantage that you don't actually need to run the Heirloom Epic. But you can assemble an alternate form of card advantage and use this. And it's pretty cool. There are cards that care about having non-creature, non-land permanents in play. Makes this a little bit better. There are cards that care about artifacts. This is a well-designed, interesting card. It's not that strong. There are like enough ways to cheat the card draw, cheat on the mana of the card draw, that I'll play it. Patchwork Banner. What a nutty artifact. So 3 mana Manalith is always almost good enough. We've seen this effect be almost good enough so often. It taps for 1 mana of any color for 3 mana, like almost there. Pump Your Team is a really nice bonus that gets you to play this. If this is pumping 2 creatures when you play it, like if this is just give you the 2 creatures you haven't played, +1/+1/+1. That is the floor of a 5. It makes mana. There's lots of good 5s to ramp into. It doesn't work in every deck. I'm going to go ahead and lower the floor because not every deck wants this card, but enough decks want this card that I'm happy to play it. This is a really... So if you think back to the last time this effect was good, it was Heraldic Banner out of Eldraine. How good was Heraldic Banner in Eldraine? That was a 3 mana choose a color, add 1 mana of the chosen color, and it pumps creatures of that color. I think this is the best artifact. This is a very good card. I know 7's a little high, but like I will take this first pick in order to delay my decision so often. And it will always fit into every deck. It's a little bit like the 2 mana energy card in the last set in MH3. Short Bow. This is just a very efficient piece of equipment. Handing around +1/+1 vigilance and reach for 1 mana, really strong. And like this is the kind of equipment you want to be playing. In addition to that, reach, very useful. Vigilance, niche usefulness. Like you can use a short bow to run the... Where'd it go? To run the Heirloom Epic. Also, equipping is a targeted ability, which means that short bow is a 1 mana way to trigger Valiant on every creature on your board, in addition to being a good equipment. So that ceiling of a 6, that's in the Valiant deck. The only reason the floor is a 3 is you can't fit that many. Like, your Valiant deck wants 2 copies of these. Every other deck wants 1 copy of these. This card is really powerful. Don't sleep on it. Why is it always the equipment? Like, so I'm always the most different from other content creators on equipment. But this is a very good one. Starforged Sword. This one is not as good. So giving your opponent... so 4 mana, losing flying on equipment is huge. Like, usually with equipment, what makes it good is tossing it to a flyer or dealing with a flyer. This is a card that will never let you block a flyer. It will never let you attack with a flyer into something else. There are unblockable creatures, which make this card pretty good. Like, if there are other forms of evasion, it makes your menace creatures better. It makes your unblockable creatures better. But you want this kind of effect on a flyer. Gifting your opponent tap fish is not nothing, and you're giving your opponent a chump blocker. However, +3/+3 on an equipment, that's big stats. So it's not unplayable, but it is weak. I hadn't. So sorry, Max. So one thing I hadn't thought of. This isn't what you said. Is if you have this does let you play a deck of all flying creatures and then use the not like use the flying bonus on things. Yeah, it's not useless, but it is not good either. Tangle Tumbler, 3 mana 6/6. If this is a 3 mana 6/6 for you with a nice bit of threat, with a nice threat of activation, this card is great. But tapping 2 untapped tokens you control isn't free. So that ceiling of a 6, that's in a food deck or an offspring deck in a way that you have a bunch of creatures. You need to have ways to turn this on that aren't going to be a huge cost for you. You need to have 2 food you can tap or a rabbit in a food you can tap, because then you've got a 6/6 that you spent 3 mana on. You can block with it, you can attack with it. If you play a turn 2 offspring creature, that doesn't work. There's only one that makes it do it. But like if this is a 3 mana 6/6 blocker, this card is so good. If it attacks and then still gets to block and grow a creature, it's so good. Otherwise, it's not playable. I gave it a 4 with a ceiling. Ceiling's gonna be a 7. It's really tough to get this card to that ceiling, but it might be worth the effort. All right, so Theo, yeah. So this is a raccoon-powered tumbleweed. So this is a raccoon-powered tumbleweed. So yes, so they are in the tumbleweed, which is actually just a knot of trees, pushing it along with all of these knives, like butcher's knives and glass bottles and knives on sticks. They're nudging it along, and like it's rolling past another raccoon saying, "Here, have a sword," and that's the +1/+1 counter. But if you don't have food inside to lure other raccoons or to move it along, I love the flavor for this thing. I love this card, if you can't tell. It is a ball of swords and sticks. So yes, this card is really hard to work with, and I'm very excited to try and work with it anyway. It's so cool. It's so dumb and cool. The dumb cards are the coolest ones. But yes, you need to, if you can feed it 2 food, card's really good. If you can't, ignore it. Yeah. I like this because it's not restricted. This card is going to be like, there's no color or color pair where this card is free or the best. Is going to require synergy packets built around this card in any given set of colors. I'm very excited to try and make this work and fail. Right. In the right deck, this card is fantastic. Otherwise, this card's unplayable. Like, you don't ever need to activate this ability for it to be relevant text, because 3's a lot. But the threat of active, like, if you attack with this creature, if you tap 2 food to attack with this creature and a 4/4 and a 3/3 and 2 4/4s, your opponent can't ever block with their 4/4s because the threat of activation is so valuable. Right. All right. Finally, for the artifacts, we have 3 Tree Mascot. This is a slightly better changeling. This is a 2 mana 2/1 changeling. Like, you have to care about the typal synergies. You have to care about having squirrels or rabbits. But then if you do, this card's quite good. The fixing is relevant. We've seen this ability be relevant fixing in other sets and other weaker sets, which includes this one. But it is a good card when you care about the typal synergies. Otherwise, avoid it. Like, this is going to be a worse version of most things, of what most decks want, but it has a place. That's why it's got a lower effort value. It's got a higher ceiling than the other changeling card, because sometimes you will need this fixing. Sometimes you will need a 2-drop. Sometimes you will need a squirrel. Like, if this does 2 of those 3 things for you, like if you need this to be a squirrel and a 2-drop, if you need this to be a rabbit and fixing, then the card's playable, and that's the ceiling of a 5. But you're still not going to pick it early. All right, so finally we have Hidden Grotto. There's 7 lands in the set at common and uncommon. We're only going to talk about 2 of them right now. The other ones I put in with their respective colors because they make more sense there. Hidden Grotto. The filtering, not terribly relevant. What is relevant is Surveilling 1. A land that mills you 1 is very good in this format. So green, white, and black all have recursion. Green, black, and blue. Oh, and blue has recursion. Every color but red cares about populating the graveyard in this. which makes Surveil on a land worth a whole card. Well, it's worth an extra card a lot of the time. Like, this is often going to be 1.1 or 1.2 cards. And that's great on a land if you can fit it into your deck. And since we're leaning towards 2-color pairs more often, we're going to be pretty happy to do it. Yes, this is not a high splash set. And that's not because the mana is bad. Actually, I want to talk about... Let me do one more land, and we're going to talk about Splashing Beard. Finally, Uncharted Haven. This in Neon Dynasty, this card's a 6 or a 7. In this set, you just don't need to splash as much, and your 1-drops are good in this set. So having a tap land becomes a liability. Your 2-drops and 1-drops are good. So like, I'll play the first copy usually, but generally I'm not gonna pick this really high compared to Uncharted Haven. This exact card in other sets. It's a lot worse in this set than it has been in others. All right, so let's pick any set. TLB. Type. Let's pick a legendary squirrel because I remember what that card does. Here we go. Camellia the Seed Miser. So it's a 3-mana 3/3. Menace other squirrels you control as menace. Whenever you sacrifice 1 or more food, create a 1/1 green squirrel creature token. 2-mana forage. Put a +1/+1 counter on each other creature you control. This is a very powerful card in the squirrel deck. You don't want to splash this in your green-white deck. You don't want to splash this in your black-red deck. It's not worth it. The cards here are really well designed to only go into specific archetypes. So you will occasionally need to splash, but they gave removal. Every color has removal. You won't have to splash red for your removal spell when you can pick up late Bumbleflower's Sharepot for your green-white deck. Like, it's not that splashing is difficult, it's that it's not usually necessary. I say that having not seen all the mythics. I'll do my best, Haiku. I knew I wouldn't be able to do it in July, but message me, okay? I haven't forgotten about them. All right, so this is a thing that I was working on, but I didn't have time to finish. But I want to set the stage for it. Back of a Magic card. Copy image. Paste image. All right, so we might cut this from the video. This is the back of a Magic card. These are the colors. I think that what Wizards did this set is set every color pair on a scale rather than a circle. So if we look at black, the black-red mechanic is Bloodthirst. The black-green mechanic is Forage. The black-white mechanic is Life-Changing. The blue-black mechanic is Threshold. Threshold and Forage are on opposite ends of that spectrum. They are not compatible. But Forage works really well with food, which you get from white cards. There's some good white food cards. Valiant works really well with a lot of the token triggers. We'll talk about those more specifically when we get into the token triggers. Threshold tends to work, has a lot of removal and surveil that works well with there's like a lot of white recursion spell. So I do think that there's a scale for every color of left to right. But the reason that I scrapped the theory is it's not consistently linear. Like, the scale for black goes from black, green, black, white, black, red, black, blue. And then the scale for red goes red, black, red, white, red, blue, red, green. So it's not consistent enough. I'm going to try and work it into the article, but it's something that I might bring up when we talk about this stuff because I'm putting it into the article. If I can confirm the theory when I think it through. All right, 30-second break, and then we're going to talk about white in general. Do we have any questions about that section? I need a way to visually indicate to... So, this card has a place. It's good with prowess stuff. It's good with really specific things, but it's not a Like, I'm not going to take it high. I'm not going to be happy when I have to play this for fixing. So we'll talk more about this as we go, Haiku. The fact is, it did go through that time. Like, the fact is, it's the worst version of this stuff. Yes, it's good for forage decks. So, like, this is 1/3 of a forage, plus 1/7 of a threshold, plus 1 prowess trigger, on top of getting you a land. That's not worth 2 mana most of the time. It is worth 2 mana if you are enabling a splash. So, like, if you have a bomb mythic rare that you get to play because of the fountain port, no, it's 2 mana, because if this is 1 mana, put a land on top of your library, that's very bad. If this is 2 mana, put a land into your hand, that's solid. That's really good. Well, no, it's still bad. And yes, you can spread it out across 2 turns, but this does enough different things. So here's the things it does: 1/7 of threshold, 1/3 of forage, is a permanent in play for cards that count permanents in play, triggers prowess, enables fixing. I'd say this card is good if it does 3 of those things in your deck. If it doesn't do 3 of those things in your deck, you have access to better versions of this card. I came back and lowered this rating after I checked that, but like, it needs to do 3 of those things, and that's really tough because you're not going to put forage and threshold in the same deck. You will have forage or you will have threshold and prowess in the same deck, which means that it tends to be, the difference is that splash. That splash, when the splash is worth it, that's when this card is worth it. And I don't think that happens quite often enough. But we're going to talk about this more as we get specifically through blue. Blue is where we will talk more about Fountain Port Bell, because that's when you'll get to see more of the replacements for it. And it's the same reason that, like, this card is pretty average. It's not that this is a bad card on its own, it's that you have better versions of this card that do everything that it wants to do. But a 3 doesn't mean this card is unplayable. It means that you're looking to replace it, but if you have to play this, it's not the end of the world. Yeah, but so does a land. A land also guarantees that you hit your land draw. Like, neither of these guarantee it. These both guarantee that you hit your land drop to the same degree. Like, you might replace a land with this, but I'm not going to replace a land with it unless I need those effects. This card's not unplayable. Like, I do think that ceiling of a 5 will happen reasonably often, but I don't think, like, it is. I think it is a replaceable level card. We're going to move on to white.